Alright, so I know that we just did a brief history on the M1 Abrams, but today we're going to go into the history of it, why it was developed, what its role is, and what's going to happen to this thing in the future. Now, before we get into the M1 Abrams and what its role is, I feel that it's only right to go into what it came from, what led to develop it in the first place, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, I promise this is absolutely relevant. This is the M60 patent. This replaced the M48, and it was designed as a stopgap, so it was to be a temporary replacement until they found their next main battle tank. That's sort of where the M1 Abrams comes into play. Now, you had other models like the T-29 Pershing, you had the Super Pershing. They wanted to create the T-32 and the T-34 as their main battle tanks, but every time they made a new battle tank, it ended up getting stopgapped as a temporary replacement because they kept running into all kinds of issues, whether it be underpowered engines, transmission issues, issues with getting around the battlefield in a timely manner, issues with their guns not being as powerful as, say, the last iteration or the next iteration, or by the time that they're built and produced, they're already outdated. So they're already having all kinds of issues and a ton of trouble. Alright, so that brings us to about 1962, 1963 for the MBT-70 project, which was a joint project between the US and West Germany. Now, the entire goal of the MBT-70 project was to completely replace the M48 and the M60, as well as the Pershings and the Super Pershings, for one main battle tank. Now, with the creation of the MBT-70 project, basically what they were going to do is they were going to have a 152mm main gun, as well as having an autoloader to replace the loader crew member. Now, as far as the 152mm main gun, not only would it be able to fire standard ammunition, but it would also be able to fire the Shillelagh missile. So without turning this into a missile video and keeping it on topic, the Shillelagh missile was essentially the very first tow missile. It was a anti-tank guided missile. Anyway, so back to the Abrams. By 1970, the MBT-70 project completely broke down. There was collaboration issues between the US and West Germany, and West Germany ended up just ending the collaboration altogether. So the US created their own version called the XM803. Now, due to reliability and budgetary restraints, the XM803 ended up getting canceled in 1971, and by 1972, they had created the XM815. Reference, this is the XM815. Now, for this new version, they would have to have thicker armor, so the armor on the XM815 was around 2 feet thick, whereas on the M60 patent, it was only around 4 inches thick. So, it's a lot heavier. Now, this weighed in at around 58 tons, and the original plan was to keep it under 45 tons, and that was very quickly abandoned by General Abrams. Now, by November of 1972, the XM815 had been renamed the XM1, and they were reaching out to different companies to figure out who could make the best prototype. Now, this is where Chrysler gets involved, which kind of blows my mind a little bit. But, so Chrysler and GM both made their own prototype of the XM1 just to see whose was better. Now, of course, both tanks were armed with the M68 105mm main gun, and that was pretty much where the similarities stopped. The designs were different, the armors were different. They were two totally different tanks. Now, during testing at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, GM's design would prove to be far superior to that of Chrysler's, and GM would end up winning the contract for the XM1. Now, with all of that being said, GM ended up running into some issues in 1976 after Germany tried to send 3 Leopard tanks over for testing to see what was up. Now, they were also trying to implement the gas turbine engines and diesel turbine engines into the Abrams as well at this point. GM was having all kinds of issues, they were having trouble with procurement, and the costs were going way higher than they expected. And this is where Chrysler comes back into play. So Chrysler comes out of left field, gets it all done at a much lower price because military grade, and they end up winning the contract right out from under GM's nose. Gotta hand it to Chrysler. So after Chrysler won the contract, the XM1 was officially named the M1 Abrams after General Creighton Abrams, and in 1979 they went into production. Now by 1982, Chrysler Defense had already built 1,000 M1 Abrams, but they were bought out by General Dynamics Land Systems, and they would continue production from there. Now, a total of 3,273 M1 Abrams were produced from 1979 to 1985, and they were officially introduced into the military for service for combat use in 1980. Now, by 1986, the XM1E1 project had started. Now, this was to allow the XM1 project to continue if it so needed to, but the XM1E1 was really for any updates that the M1 Abrams needed. So what they thought they were going to need was maybe a bigger gun. They liked having the 105mm because it fit with every other NATO nation on every one of their tanks. However, by this time, Germany's Rheinmetall Corporation had produced the 120mm main gun for the Leopard 2As. And so Chrysler decided that they were going to update their M1 Abrams to incorporate this new, bigger gun. Now, this 120mm main gun was a smoothbore, so the accuracy wasn't great, but the rounds that they had were fin stabilized, so they stabilized themselves in the air to improve accuracy. It was also named the M256 for American use. The German use had a different moniker. Now, about 5,000 of the M1A1s were produced from 1986 to 1992. I think it's important to note the M1 Abrams at this time was still very, very new. It was still in its infancy from prototype to combat use, so they were still being used alongside the M60A3 Patton tanks that they were designed to replace. Now, the first Abrams tanks to arrive in Saudi Arabia in August of 1990 were the M1s. However, by January of 1991, all but 2 of those tank battalions had been completely replaced by the M1A1 with the bigger gun. Now, in total during this time, between the Army and the Marine Corps, they had deployed a little over 2,000 M1A1 Abrams to the battlefield, and they proved far superior to the Iraqis' Soviet-built T-54 and T-55s, as well as the T-62s. Now, of those 2,000 Abrams deployed, only 23 were ever damaged or destroyed, and 9 of them were destroyed by friendly fire, 2 of which were intentional. Now, due to the bigger gun, better sights, better electronics, and just overall advanced technologies over every other tank on the battlefield, the M1 Abrams, or the M1A1, was able to pin enemies at around 2,500 meters, or 8,200 feet. Now, that's important to know because no other tank on the battlefield at this point in time was even close to capable of doing that. That's beyond visual range for almost every other tank. Just to do a quick recap here, the M1A1 was produced from 1986 to 1992. It also proved to be the absolute baddest machine on the battlefield at that time. And that brings us to 1993, when they developed the M1A2 Abrams. Now, the M1A2 or the M1A2 SEP was a further advancement on the M1A1 design. They still kept the 120mm main gun, however, they added a different armor system. Now, SEP stands for System Enhancement Package, and it added digital maps, a Force Battle Command Brigade and below Linux communication systems for commanders, an improved cooling system to compensate for heat generated by the additional computer systems, and so on. Now, the M1A2 SEP also serves as the basis for the M104 Wolverine Heavy Assault Bridge. Yes, because in America, we even have assault bridges. Now, the M1A1 SEP V2 or version 2 added common remotely operated weapon stations, support, color displays, better interfaces, a new operating system, better front and side armor, and an upgraded transmission for better durability. Now, further upgrades included depleted uranium armor for all variants, a system overhaul that returns all A1s to like new condition, a digital enhancement package for the A1, and a commonality program to standardize parts between the US Army and the Marine Corps. Now, between the M1A2 SEP V2s and SEP V3s, they both had explosive reactive armor and could both be upfitted with the Tusk armor or Tank Urban Survival Kit. Now, explosive reactive armor is kind of cool. I'm not going to sit on it for too long, but essentially on vulnerable parts of the tank's armor, they would have shaped charges so that if it was impacted by, say, an RPG or another high explosive, that shaped charge would blow back out. So fight fire with fire, basically, is the thought process here. Now, in 2020, for a force restructuring plan, the U.S. Marine Corps divested in all M1 Abrams tanks, or all tanks in general. Now they just use mounted combat systems and troop carriers. Now, the M1A2 SEP V3 is still in production, and there are no signs of it slowing down anytime soon. With that said, I know that there's a lot going on right now, and there are M1A2s in use in battle right now. I do not want to get into that. This is strictly the history of the M1 Abrams. So to close this off, I want to note that the M1A2 and M1A1 and M1 Abrams were all supposed to be replaced by a completely separate vehicle. So the XM1202 was a mounted combat system that was going to be utilized by the US Army, and that entire project ended up getting canceled in 2010, and I can only imagine it's because the budgetary restraints that they had couldn't even measure up to what it would be worth to replace these tanks, for one. For two, the M1 Abrams, the whole family line, has proven to be just an absolute powerhouse on the battlefield. They have been unstoppable since the day they were created and first used in combat. So there you have it. There's your history on the M1 Abrams and the entire family line. Now, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment. Any sort of engagement really helps out, and I can't do this without your guys' support. Thanks, and have a great day.